Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it's time for another news roundup podcast episode. As always, I'm joined by our assistant editor, Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hey, Eamon, welcome.
Hi, Jason. Great to be here.
Great to have you, and we'll be moving through quite a few different items in this episode. It's been a little while since we've done a roundup, so we have quite a few headlines to really touch on and move through as we look ahead into the autumn months here. So where should we start?
Well, I know one of the things that was really interesting if we look back at August, we have the appointment announcement from Microsoft for Vahe Torossian, who's going to be heading up the business applications group.
Right, and the first thing I want to mention on this was some confusion about the wording that Microsoft used. They described him as leading the business applications group. Now, when I think of who leads the business applications group, I think of basically James Phillips, Alyssa Taylor, primarily as the two sort of leaders in different ways. I think James might be the overall leader. He had a title of president, but to say that Vahe Torossian was leading, it made me think, well, is there a shakeup of the others there? I was able to confirm that, in fact, Vahe Torossian's role is leading sales, which was an open role following the departure of the previous sales lead for the business applications group. So he's taking over a very important role, one that was left empty, but not shaking up the rest of the executive team. Microsoft wouldn't officially even confirm that to me for some reason, which I thought was, I didn't really get into it with them after I asked it initially, and they said they wouldn't say anything. But I felt like that was an important clarification to make, because otherwise it made it seem like, the whole team was being shaken up and totally different leadership, which is not. And his move here from a senior level role in Western Europe, or I think leading Western Europe sales, was part of a bigger change in the European region for Microsoft. An executive from the UK is now leading Western Europe, and another executive from the UK takes the top role in the UK. So a few things changing on that front.
Well, speaking of important announcements, I know one of the things that's been an interesting insight lately is that Dynamics 365 now constitutes half of Microsoft's $3 billion business apps revenue, which is a very substantial proportion of that, and really speaks to the extent to which Dynamics 365 has grown in the market since its appearance.
Yeah, Microsoft spoke about this in an investor conference that was it was broadcast, and their head of investor relations spoke about it, among other things, covering the business for these financial analysts. And he made the point that basically this was revealing a little more than I think what had been known before. So just sort of pushing the envelope out a bit, that Dynamics is over a $3 billion business. I think it's something that people already assumed. The analyst sort of leading the Q&A at this event suggested that it was even more than that it was over $4 billion, but Microsoft wouldn't confirm that. All the investment relations leader would say was that that's investment relations GM Mike Spencer, was that it's over $3 billion, and that more than half is Dynamics 365 business. Now, again, when you really get into that, it starts to raise the question of how they classify the different types of revenue, what's really considered 365 now versus legacy. For example, I've heard that in some cases, perhaps, GP is now considered part of the D365 SMB product family. If that's true, that shifts a whole bunch of revenue to D365. Or are they really talking about pure Business Central, finance and operations, the customer engagement suite, the AI suite, and all that? So it's really, you could sort of split hairs even more there if you wanted to. And the other kind of thing I took away from this event and hearing the questions asked was, financial analysts see Microsoft. Microsoft's, obviously such a powerhouse financial performer. They kind of think, well, why hasn't Microsoft taken over the entire CRM enterprise space or the entire ERP enterprise space? Why haven't they killed SAP or Salesforce or Oracle at this point? Or maybe not Oracle, but at least in their enterprise apps space. And I think Mike Spencer from Microsoft had to sort of kind of temper that question, because competing in the enterprise CRM and ERP obviously is not the same as competing on Azure or competing on sort of productivity apps. It's a really different kind of scrap, and that's why Microsoft is not. At $3 billion, that's less than, I think, half of what Salesforce's annual revenue is. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the scale that they're battling at. They're sort of in the same ballpark as a Salesforce or an SAP, perhaps, but in terms of enterprise apps. But they're not killing them by any means. They're really scrapping.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I think viewing things maybe from an Azure perspective, there may be some advantages in some cases to some of that revenue from getting companies to do things like host SAP programs on Azure, which is certainly probably the biggest growth area for Microsoft these days. But it's probably a complicated question, and one that I think is very interesting for people on the channel to think about in terms of why Microsoft has its strategic priorities around Dynamics the certain way that we see.
Yeah, I mean, these different lines of business that Microsoft pursues are they're all so different in the nature of how the deals are closed, how they're purchased, who they're competing against at each point. I mean, when you look at all those different levels of competition in the marketplace, and then you sort of add it all up into Microsoft's end results, it's almost a little hard to kind of wrap your head around how that works between those different competition points and then the success that Microsoft is able, and other leaders in the sort of IT and tech space sort of all shake out with winners and losers. But taking the dynamic segment in particular is really an interesting case study of how sort of complex and granular it can feel.
Jason, what were your thoughts on the lists for teams announcement? This offering is now generally available as a sort of new development option for business apps.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I haven't chatted too much with anyone about this one, honestly, but it's the kind of thing that when you're sort of tracking the business solutions team and you're tracking Dynamics and Power Platform and teams to an extent, and probably a growing extent, when you see something like lists for teams reaching general availability while that the business apps team has a very similar offering that's still trying to get out of its preview phase and doesn't even have an official product name yet after the great DataFlex debacle of 2020. It's back into Project Oakdale, which isn't a real product name. But here comes Lists, and Lists is in GA, and it's this, it's essentially modernizing or I guess improving upon, or I'm not sure if improving is the right word, SharePoint lists, which is it's become this fallback sort of data management tool. If you need a way to store tabular data with different kinds of data points, different kinds of fields, numbers, text, all sorts of different kinds of things, you can do it in a list, and it's very simple, almost like a spreadsheet, but it's stored in the cloud in SharePoint, so it's more like a database table, but it's really limited. You can't build anything too robust with it. You can build big things with it, just not robust things. So you can have giant lists with millions of rows, I think. Anyway, lots of people use it. It's become sort of one of these fallback ways of storing data in businesses. The business applications team has made the case over the last few years now that the common data service and the common data model underneath it is a much better way to store your data. If you're a business and you have business applications, you have processes, you have data entities that need to be modeled and so forth, you should be using something more robust like common data service, which can handle, it can handle also all kinds of data from transactional stuff to large scale, sort of big data cases to files and images and all sorts of things. So that's sort of the gold standard at Microsoft in terms of modeling business applications, other than real database design stuff. And the idea of putting it into teams was sort of this dream, I guess you would say, of everyone's building real relational data type of solutions right from teams. You don't have to be a pro dev, Well, now they're going to get lists in teams first. And that means if they're looking to model data, if they're looking to build, sort of small scale applications for their teams to work against, they're going to do it with a list. And it just adds one more hurdle to making this Project Oakdale idea a reality. And it maybe even just sort of, pushes more and more organizations away from, or just raises the walls around lists and raises the difficulty in transitioning them to the Power Platform in the future. So, it's one of these. It's certainly not the first time Microsoft had competing products. I would say Lists and Project Oakdale are very much competing for the team's app building space, but it's just the latest example of it, and sort of speaks to the sort of no holds barred approach that Microsoft sometimes takes when it comes to product management and product releases, and these different teams that have different kind of interests. I think I haven't talked to anyone at Microsoft about it. I'm sure they can sort of talk away the differences and say that they each have their own strengths and blah blah blah. But from an optics point of view, it's not a good moment for the people cheering on Project Oakdale.
One of the other things that we've seen lately that's a little bit similar to the revenue announcement related to Dynamics 365 is that Microsoft has actually moved up in Gartner's field service ratings due to substantial increases in the number of users as well as sort of growth of assets.
Right. And this was notable, I think, because it was a move up in these rankings. So I think it speaks to the effort and the sort of the successes that the Dynamics 365 field service team has had. And it also was, it was the kind of report. I don't honestly pay all that much attention to every analyst report that comes out. I think they all, some of them are interesting, but some of them have, are a little bit problematic, you might say, in terms of this. Are they self-serving? Are they working with the vendors too closely and so forth? This one had good numbers in it, though, which I thought was really interesting. Like the headline one to me was, there's more than 400,000 users out there across all the customers of field service using it. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of users, 400,000. And in talking to one person with a little bit of knowledge about the true stats around field service, Gartner shared a few, and I think some of them they estimated. Microsoft probably disclosed a few, but things like 3.5 million work orders on processed on a monthly basis, 7.2 million resource bookings on a monthly basis. Adding over 14 million customer assets per month, and over 200 million assets in total under management. I believe those assets under management is one of those metrics that some of the other big competitors in the field service space, vendors like that were right there in the leadership sort of area with Microsoft, IFS, Salesforce, ServiceMax. Some of them try to make an arms race out of how many hundreds of millions of assets they have under management. And I think field service is right near the top. I don't believe that I think Microsoft may not really publicize that or even make a big deal about it, because I don't think they see it as the most important thing for customers to pay attention to. But I think it just speaks to how much that service is growing. And anytime we get a look at that, I'm always, anytime we get a sense of, sort of how a product is really growing in the marketplace, I think that's certainly interesting. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really useful to mention on that. No, I would just, it's certainly something to keep watching. I think it's just a product that has really shown visible strength over the last few years here as it's matured.
Well, something else to keep an eye on is Microsoft's current efforts to continue to make AppSource a commerce platform for D365, particularly for ISV solutions, kind of getting those out to the market.
Right. And so this piece referenced an interview that Microsoft MVP Steve Mordew did with Toby Bowers. Toby Bowers is sort of taking over the lead on the ISV Connect program at Microsoft, which serves the ISVs who work in the business application space. He's taking over a program and a role from Steve Guggenheimer, who is retiring sometime in the very near future from Microsoft, and who tried to he kind of took this role over a year or so ago, really tried to put his stamp on it and reshape it, reform it, sort of force the ISV ecosystem into working the way he wanted them to work, to sort of fit what he saw as sort of the optimal sort of working order of things. It's had, some successes in this, you might say, around sort of reshaping what AppSource really looks like right now. I would certainly say that Guggenheimer hasn't done everything he aimed to do, and I think he kind of admits that. He set a pretty bold vision of trying to get really reshape AppSource, reshape everything about how even transactions happen with ISVs, and that hasn't happened yet. I think there's plenty of good arguments out there from the ISV community about why this wasn't the right approach. How some of the ideas were good or interesting, but weren't realized in a way that actually is going to lead to better performance on their side. The tax that's on ISVs is not really being levied in a way that's really paying them back in the right ways. So I think it's been a bit of a blunt instrument. And what I was looking for in that interview was a sign of how, what's going to happen next. Is Bowers really going to just kind of continue on and push ahead with Goog's view or vision, or is he going to start making changes? From all he said to Steve Mordew, it sounds like he's just going to continue on more or less with the vision that Goog set out. It's very, very early days, I think, so we'll have to, it'll be interesting to look 6 or 12 months from now and see if that actually is what happened. I think and the reason I, putting on my editorial hat here, editorializing hat, is I think there's plenty of ways he could change it and put his own stamp on it and really help ISVs in ways that they're not being helped today. One of the big things that he did promise was that commerce and transactability, buying apps essentially on AppSource is coming, but it's not coming just yet. They want to try to still fix other things about that sort of directory listing service that they already have today and firm things up, presumably, before they get into that. But I think, if they're serious about that, they need to do it soon. I mean, I think there's several other marketplaces out there that do a nice job with it in other vendor ecosystems. So the right kind of commerce platform really could help ISVs. It's one of the things that could anyway. So we'll have to see. But yeah, new leadership there. So again, I thought worth noting.
And something else that I think has also been interesting to note, which is kind of just an interesting use case for some of this technology that we often see demoed at big conferences, but don't always think about how it applies in the real world. Mercedes-Benz USA went ahead and deployed Dynamics 365 Remote Assist and HoloLens 2 for 383 dealerships across the US, which is a pretty large-scale deployment of both these pieces of technology, and interesting to see them paired together like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that actually stood out to me about this was how very kind of conventional this use case is in the context of what Remote Assist is supposed to be. I mean, it's in kind of looking at it from the outside, it's pretty cool. Like, these dealerships have these cool HoloLens devices. They can get this augmented reality, very futuristic kind of interaction with a remote technical experts because I mean, Lord knows how complex Mercedes-Benz electronics have become, and all the sort of features that they pack into these luxury cars now, even way more so than sort of more run-of-the-mill brands. And so I think it's a great case for it. If it's working well for them, and it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is really seems like a very, very, like I said, very straight ahead set of capabilities, then hopefully, for Microsoft, it would be a great case study, because then they can show this to other companies that have service teams, and maybe accelerate the uptake on it. Because I really don't know how good the uptake's been with these tools so far. There's certainly some interesting use cases. This is one that's just very conventional and sort of, I think, easy for almost any other kind of manufacturer with a services arm to kind of understand and perhaps sort of appreciate.
Something I think is interesting to note and worthwhile mentioning for our listeners is that after 6 months on, it seems strange to say only 6 months from really the start of the lockdowns in much of Europe and the US and Oceania and places all around the world. We're finally seeing the pace of conferences pick up as we head into the fall, although most of these are, of course, virtual conferences that people will be holding to discuss different aspects of the business apps and cloud scene for Microsoft.
Right. So, I mean, the conference schedule, the world's conference schedule, I guess, kind of, at least in the Microsoft space, kind of works on 6 month cycle. There's spring events, there's fall, autumn events, and then you repeat the process every year. With coronavirus hitting in March, that killed a bunch of events for that cycle. Some did actually make it through before that, but a lot didn't. And now we're into the big question was what will happen in the fall. Well, here we are, and everything's virtual. That was finally, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we kind of had the final decisions of the holdouts to do that. So I thought we could just maybe run through a few of the ones that are sort of probably most relevant to our readers. So we just had a new virtual event that kind of sprang out of this. That was Dynamics Con. Over 5,000. I should check my numbers, but 5 to 6 over. I think it's maybe even over 6,000 registered attendees for that totally free open event, and that was last week, and that was sort of a very new take on conferences. And there's others like that out there. There's Power Platform 24. There's other, especially Power Platform events like that. And I think we'll see even more of different flavors that are sort of pure online events kind of being formed and just kind of created out of almost nothing. And then you have the class of events that had been on-prem, may go back to on-prem sometime in the future, but for now we're definitely all online. And so just a couple of those to note. The next one that we have coming up is Ignite 2020. That's I believe September 22nd it starts. That's a great one from Microsoft. It's free. I attended that in person last year. It's a really great event for people tracking Azure technology, business applications, as well as the productivity app. So certainly worth signing up for that if you follow these products, because it's really IT focused and sort of technical focused, but not developer focused set of content. There will be a presence for Dynamics, Power Platform, product teams there as well. Soon after that is sort of the official launch event for the business apps, sort of October release wave 2 for 2020. So that's coming soon after Ignite. And then the two other things worth mentioning, I think, are the two of the other sort of stalwart events and conferences in the dynamic space. One is Summit North America, which is again one of these ones that made the decision to go all online. So that is happening in October, and then the Directions North America and Directions EMEA events were both going to be held in the autumn timeframe. Well, I think Directions North America, they ended up just canceling the in-person event. They're going to go ahead with their 2021 spring event instead. But then the Directions Europe team, which is really a separate team, made the decision to scrap they had made several attempts at trying to run an in-person event, and I think it just became too difficult. And I think they saw too much concern, I think, for people interested in traveling to a sort of in-person conference in their region. So they will be doing a virtual event as well later in the fall, and we had an article on that we'll link to. So yeah, now an all online season of events here at the end of 2020. It kind of answers that question that people were thinking about.
And I'm sure going forward it'll be very interesting, because we'll probably have some in-person events surely return at some point, because there's certainly a pent-up demand for that among the members of the channel and partners and MVPs and users who all really, really have benefited in the past from that kind of experience. But I think it seems likely that many of these online virtual events may be here to stay, or be a bigger part of the event scene going forward.
Yeah, my just personal prediction based on not knowing anything more than anybody else is, these events are here certainly through 2021. I personally can't imagine that even if there are some in-person activity in 2021, that it'll be the scale that most conference businesses really need to make it worth their while. So, and then, once you've got a couple of years of virtual events under your belt, I think with Microsoft, I don't know for sure, but from what I do know, the huge numbers of people attending their formerly in-person sort of tentpole shows, Ignite, Inspire, Build, the people that are the multiples of attendance compared to the in-person event, which were already very big in the tens of thousands, and you're getting over 100,000 now registering and attending and gaining this content that only a select few were getting before. It's hard to look back and say we're going to cut that off. So, will you see hybrid in the future? Will you see some just stay as virtual? It's hard to say.
And before we close, I think it's worth mentioning a bit of sad news for the community, which is the death of John Gravely, an entrepreneur who had very deep ties to the channel, who passed away at the very young age of 53. This was announced by his family in an obituary.
Yeah, this was really took me. I think it took everyone who knew him by real surprise. Someone so young and seemingly active and healthy. And listen, I based my article about learning of his death just on what I read there. I don't have any extra information, anything like that. It sounded like his family wanted to keep it fairly private. He was someone just personally that I've known as almost as long as I've been in the dynamic space, which is over 12 years. He was probably one of the most respected sort of entrepreneurial leaders in the channel. He built really admired businesses, and I think was respected as a hard-nosed business person, but also one who really knew what he was doing and had a great nose for finding success. He was an intense guy in terms of his focus and his competitiveness. He was in probably the craziest of the segments when I first met him, which was the marketing automation space. 10, 12 years ago, it was sort of the Wild West for marketing automation. There were multiple well-funded vendors out there. He founded ClickDimensions, which was definitely one of the smaller players. It was really just focused on Microsoft and Dynamics CRM at the time. But which it seemed like he was sort of the David among the Goliaths, and it seemed like that company would have would have a lot of disadvantages, but they outlasted and outperformed quite a few other marketing automation firms at that time to really kind of solidify their space with thousands of customers in this one market. He had a great exit selling to a private equity firm and moved on to other things. But yeah, I think I was certainly not the only person who was shaken by that. I think a lot of everyone who knew him was just very shocked and saddened to hear this news. It was several weeks ago now, and it's still just a real sad, somber thing to have happened. Well, on that note, I think we are going to start wrapping up. We do, as I said, Eamon, a lot of news that should be ramping up with Ignite coming up, the business applications launch event, and a whole lot more with these other virtual conferences, several other podcast episodes I have planned. What else do you have on your plate?
Well, something I'm very excited about is the upcoming coverage for Ignite. It looks to be action-packed from the Azure side of things, which naturally I'm always interested in the cloud news side of things while I keep up with business apps as well. And so looking forward to hearing from Microsoft some additional details about some of the big announcements that we'll be hearing there. And so I think our readers and our listeners can expect plenty more information there as we go forward, as Microsoft really shows its hand, hopefully, during the upcoming event.
Great. Well, we will end it there. Eamon, thanks once again. How can people reach you?
Folks can reach me anytime at my email address, earls@msdynamicsworld.com.
All right. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can follow us on Twitter @msdynamicsworld. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.